Odds are good you've talked about CPUs casually. Like, I've got an Intel CPU or I've got an AMD CPU. In this episode, I want to answer one simple question. What is a CPU? Now, I've got a CPU in my hand right here. And what I want to do is just kind of give you I'm a CPU collector. I literally have hundreds and hundreds of CPUs. So I just thought I'd throw out a few. Some of these CPUs are close to 30 years old. Some of these are quite new. And just give you an idea of what CPUs physically look like. Underneath, they've got little pins or wires. Sometimes they've got little pads. And this is the brain of the computer itself. But I hate the word brain. To me, a CPU, and by the way, it stands for Central Processing Unit, the CPU is more like a really, really incredibly powerful calculator. This calculator can calculate billions of different calculations per second. And the secret is we have to learn to talk to this guy in such a way that we can actually make him do things like make games with things blowing up and make spreadsheets appear and make websites do whatever they do. So in order to understand what a CPU is, I want to kind of go with an analogy that I call a man in a box. What I want you to do is imagine that there is a box. Inside this box is this dude. And this guy can add, subtract, multiply, divide like incredibly fast. But the problem is he's physically inside the box. There's no way we can get to him. This box is made out of 18 feet of concrete or whatever you need to do to understand that we can't like tap on the box or anything to talk to this guy. So what I want to do first of all is come up with a way for us to communicate with this guy, which I'm going to call the external data bus. And it looks something like this. So here's 8 light bulbs. Now, it's not just 8 light bulbs. In fact, we're going to make 16 light bulbs. And this is going to be the wall of the box, okay? So there's going to be 8 light bulbs that are visible inside the box and 8 light bulbs that are visible outside the box. In fact, we're going to put a light switch underneath each one of these pairs, and we're even going to put a light switch inside. Now, with this setup, here's what we can do. If I flip on, say, this first switch right here, it's going to turn on the light bulb outside the box, and it's also going to turn on the light bulb inside the box, and through some magic of electricity, it'll even flip this switch up, okay? And so by flipping one switch, we turn on these 2 lights and even flips the switch up. And let's just say we do this for light number 4. If I flip this up, this light is on, and it even flips the switch up. Now, before we continue this analogy, there's one thing I'd like to make sure it's okay with you. Instead of saying on and off for these light bulbs all the time, would it be okay if I just, instead of saying on, can I just say the number 1? And instead of the light bulb being off, can I just say the number 0? Yep. That's binary. Let's go ahead and continue the analogy, and this time we're going to be using 1s and 0s. So if I turn on this first light bulb and the 4th light bulb, I have created a pattern of on and off lights, and I've created a set of 8 different values. Each one of these values, by the way, is called a binary value because it can only be 0 or 1. And 8 of these across is what we call a byte. So each one of these is a binary value called a bit. And then 8 of them across is a byte. So 8 bits is equal to a byte. So what I've done here is I've created a pattern. Remember, because the same lights are turned on and off inside the box. So what I've done is, assuming that the guy inside the box knows what these different patterns mean, I can actually communicate with him. Sounds good? Well, I agree. But what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to generate a code book, because there's a whole bunch of different patterns in there. And this code book has to say, what does each different pattern of on and off lights mean, of these 8-bit patterns? So what we're going to do is generate this code book. So this code book is built into every CPU on Earth. In fact, it's called the machine language of the CPU. And people who can write different patterns of 1s and 0s to get the CPU to do different things are known as programmers. So let's go ahead and go with that analogy. Let's keep going a little bit deeper as we get this CPU running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this guy a code book. Now, he's got the code book, but before we close the lid on this guy, there's one more thing I want to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put in 4 racks of light bulbs. And each one of these racks of light bulbs are going to have 16 light bulbs on them. So we have 16 light bulbs. The function of these light bulbs are going to be storage areas for the guy inside the box to be able to do adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And by the way, we call these registers, okay? And for just this particular example, let's label them. We're going to call this one the AX register, this one the BX register, this one the CX register, and this one is the DX register. Every CPU on Earth has registers like these. In fact, in this particular example, I'm only showing you 4 different registers, which are known generically as general purpose registers, which means that the guy in the box can use them for anything he wants. On a more modern CPU, you might find 100 different registers that could be as much as 128 bits across. So we're keeping it simple for you to understand how all this works. Now that we understand that the guy has a code book and these registers, what I want to do right now is pop up an example code book. Now, the code book I'm about to show you is not real, okay? It's based on one of the oldest CPUs out there that was used on the first PCs called the Intel 8088 processor. So while I'm having a little bit of creative license in terms of exactly how this works, conceptually, this is exactly how they work. So let's take a look at this example code book. So if we take a look on this code book, it's going to say, this first pattern says, I'm going to put a number up next, put that in the AX register. Now here's a command that says, I'm going to put a number in next, put that in the BX register. And here's another command that says, add together whatever in the AX and the BX register together and put the result in the AX register. And then last is, whatever's on the AX register, put it out on the external data bus so I can see it. So in essence, what we're going to do right now is we're going to add 2 plus 3. And that's really all it boils down to. Now, before we close the lid on this guy, I'm going to throw one more thing on there. And what we're going to do is we're going to put like a bell inside. You ever gone into a store and you open the door and you hear ding, ding, ding? Okay, so this is a kind of like a bell we're going to put inside the CPU, which we call the clock. Now the clock's job is to tell the CPU to do something. So with the code book, the 4 registers, and the clock, we're now going to add 2 plus 3. You guys ready? Woohoo! Here we go. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the code in binary that says I'm about to give you a number. Whatever the number is next, put it on the AX register. So we're going to flip the wires to get that pattern based on the code book. Got it? Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually ring the bell. So really what we should do is put like a doorbell on the side, and that's going to tell the CPU that he needs to do his thing. So let's make that clock look like a little doorbell. It's actually just a wire. So we go ahead and put that in and we press the button. Now the CPU is going to see that, and what he's going to do is he's going to read that and he's going to be ready. So now what I'm going to do, oh, and by the way, when he does this, so that we know that he's ready for the next command, he'll zero all this out. We're not touching anything. We're just hitting that clock wire, then all of a sudden it goes to zeros. That's telling us the CPU is ready for the next command. So the next command is we're going to add 2 plus 3. So we're going to do the number 2 in binary. So on this part, you're going to have to do a little bit of a trust me. So that's 0, that's 1, that's 2. So now what we're going to do is take this value, light up the proper wires, and we hit that clock button. Now the thing you got to be careful here is CPUs aren't like human beings. A lot of times we're going to hit that clock button a few times for it to go ahead and zero everything out. So there's not a perfect one-to-one correlation of every time I press the doorbell, something happens. It depends on how complicated the command is. In today's modern processors, there are very, very complicated commands that would require me to hit that CPU clock about, I don't know, 100 or 200 times before the CPU actually processes it. So keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, let's keep going. So let's refer to the code book again. And the next command is we got to flip these different wires on and off to put the number 3 into the BX register. So let's go ahead and get that ready. Press that clock button until it zeroes out. That means the CPU is ready for the next value. So let's go ahead and do 3 in binary. So we'll punch that in. Let's hit the clock wire. And now all of a sudden it zeroes out. And we can't see this, but right now a binary value for the number 2 is in the AX register, and a binary value for the number 3 is in the BX register. So let's add them up. So let's refer to the code book. Here's a pattern of wires that says add whatever in the AX register to the BX register and put the result on the AX register. So yes, it's going to wipe out whatever's in the AX register. That happens. So we put that pattern in, we hit the clock wire a few times, boom, it has zeroed out, which now means we can't see it because we can't see inside the box, but now the value for a binary 5 is now in the AX register. So here's another command on the code book that says, whatever is in the AX register, put it on the external data bus so we can see it. So let's go ahead and put that pattern in. And we hit the clock wire and hit the clock wire, except this time it doesn't zero out. This time it now shows us a binary 5 on the external data bus. So congratulations, you've just added 2 plus 3 on a CPU using machine language. So this is really all that the programmer is. A programmer is a person who can use machine language to talk to a CPU to get work done. In this case, we're just adding 2 plus 3, but we can do a lot more with more modern CPUs. So that sounds great, but I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated, or actually more realistic. What we're going to be doing now is that it's really not a single entity inside the CPU. Inside the CPU, you have lots of what we call logic units that are actually doing the math, and some are really good at integer math, and some are really good at moving data around. So you have all these different functions inside a CPU. Now, have you ever done your laundry? Now, if you do your laundry, do you sit there and go, so I take all my laundry, and I go through this big pile of laundry, I pull out all my towels, and then I throw my towels in the washer, and then I dry them, and then I fold them, and then I grab another load, and then I put, no, you don't do that, do you? What you do is you get one load running, and as soon as you get that out of the washer, then you go ahead and put that in the dryer, and then while it's drying, you get another load. So you have lots of stuff running simultaneously. In the CPU world, we call this a pipeline. So let's take a look at a pipeline, except this time we won't have a man in a box. We're going to have a bunch of guys in the box. Let me show you how this works. So on the simplest CPU, we're going to have 4 guys. And these 4 guys are in front of a conveyor belt. So each time a command comes in from the external data bus, the first guy here, his job is to look at it and decide which one of these guys to give it to. Because this guy right here, he's really good at integer math. This guy right here, he's really good at we'll just call it long numbers to make it easier for right now. And this guy right here, he's really good at holding on to information or to send that information onto other places. It could be registers, or it could be outside of the CPU into this stuff called RAM. So I'm just going to call him the cache guy. We'll talk about caching in other episodes. So this guy, who we call the prefetch, he looks at that command, and he's going to look at that command and decide to do with it. So on the next click of the clock, he might send it to the integer guy, whereas another command's already come in to handle it for him. So he might, on the next click of the clock, send it over to the long integer guy. The guy in the integer, he's already done with it because he's already added it, so he moves it over to the cache guy. So what happens is all these different commands are moving along in what we call a pipeline, or also known as a core. Now, in my simple example here, the pipeline only has 4 different discrete steps. On modern CPUs, that can be 16 steps, even in some cases up to 30 different steps, depending on the make and model of CPU that you buy. The important thing is that we don't care necessarily what happens on the inside. We know that if we write using the proper machine language, as long as they can process that machine language on the inside, whether they have 4 steps, 16 steps, or 30 steps in their pipeline, it doesn't make any difference to us. It does make a big difference to companies like Intel and AMD as they build their internal architecture for CPUs, because they always want to make the best one. So when we're really talking about CPUs, the one big thing we can do right now to speed things up is to be able to hit the clock faster. So making your clock faster and faster can be good, but only up to a certain point. And keep watching some more of these episodes here, and we're going to make this CPU a lot more sophisticated and a lot faster too.